When Prince Charles ascends to the throne, Queen Elizabeth says she wants Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, to be referred to as Queen Consort. 17 claims that although Charles's wife is known as Queen Camilla, it was within the peaceful confines of her beloved Raymill retreat, rather than the opulence of Buckingham Palace, that Queen Camilla's world was rocked. What started out as a private moment quickly turned into a storm that was too big for any royal guard to control. History weighed more heavily than ever on the monarchy's brittle image. Whispers became headlines, and allegiance became distrust. Could this be the most tragic part of her queen consort journey? Remain with us, because you will be shocked by what comes next. A queen under close observation. Many people did not envision Camilla's elevation to the kingdom as a fairy tale. It was a tale marred by wounds from the past, a crown no longer worn in joy but in the shadow of controversy. She had been known for decades as the other woman, the person who was held responsible for Diana, Princess of Wales's misery. She was made fun of in newspapers. Cartoons depicted her as an intruder who had taken something that was never hers, and television pundits analyzed every action she took. Even when the crown was ultimately placed on her head, that reputation clung to her like smoke and was impossible to completely shake. For Camilla, her coronation in 2023 was more of an uncomfortable truce than a win. She had gained legitimacy in the eyes of tradition thanks to Queen Elizabeth II's approval. However, love and legality are not the same thing. History documented her as queen consort, and large crowds attended the magnificent rituals. However, there was hesitancy in the public's silent looks. Supporting her frequently sounded more like courtesy than sincere admiration, and the truth that words could not conceal was captured on camera when she stood next to Charles. Although she was never completely accepted, she was tolerated. Why, even during the height of her rule, did suspicions still exist? Part of the solution is found in Diana's lasting recollection. Time never diminished her reputation. For many, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was Diana's mirror image, beautiful, kind, and beloved. Camilla, on the other hand, seemed more rigid and icy, her charm unable to evoke the same affection. It served as a reminder that crowns may be hereditary and a parallel she would never be able to escape. However, affection needs to be earned. The monarchy is based on impression rather than wealth or jewels. Additionally, Camilla's biggest enemy was perception. Every wave and grin appeared deliberate, as though she was aware of how delicate the crown she wore was. But if her subjects never really recognized her as their own, could a queen live? Remain with us. This is just the start. It was the secret house. For most individuals, a rural retreat is just a place to relax and escape the stress of everyday life. Raymill House, a vast estate hidden in Wiltshire that Queen Camilla bought in the 1990s, long before she married Charles, was that location. It was more than just a house to her. It was a haven where she could escape the rigidity of royal protocol, encircled by the comforts of her own choosing rather than by courtiers or cameras. Instead of being the queen consort, she may live here as Camilla Parker Bowles. Critics, however, saw Raymill as something very else. Raymill was hidden from the institution's view, unlike Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, and this concealment stoked mistrust. Why, after seeing the splendor of royal life, would she hold on to it so tightly? Why pick the countryside over historic palaces? Many thought she was upholding a parallel universe, with one foot firmly outside the monarchy and the other inside. Whispers accumulated like storm clouds throughout the years. There were rumors of private meals being conducted there. Long after she married Charles, powerful people were subtly introduced by politicians without anybody noticing. Detractors saw these as warning signs, while supporters saw them as innocuous social events. Was Raymill being utilized for something far more complex, or was this just a queen looking for familiarity and comfort? It was impossible to overlook the symbolism. Palaces stand for tradition, continuity, and the crown's prominence. Raymill stood for remoteness, mystery, and the potential for shadows that are hidden from the general public. Camilla's decision to spend a weekend there rather than at Windsor each time sent a message that was more powerful than words. Her loyalties felt most secure here. As the years went by, the contrast became more pronounced and inevitable. Catherine's visits to government buildings, her interactions with kids in school corridors, and her giggles with hospital personnel went viral. In the meantime, Camilla's fondness for Ray Mill created a detached image of a queen withdrawing from her subjects. The estate no longer appeared to be a safe haven. It started to appear to the general public as a secret vault, a location where the hidden dramas of the monarchy may take place. Could such weight be carried by a single house? Could peaceful gardens and stone walls serve as a backdrop for rumors that could topple a monarchy? As things turned out, the response was much more disturbing than anyone had anticipated. Keep your eyes open. You'll want to know what came to light next. The brittle numerals of the crown. The monarchy has served as a representation of continuity for ages, unaltered by historical upheavals, wars, and revolutions. Tradition, not popularity, was always cited as its strength. However, flaws in that belief started to appear by the middle of the 20s. Numbers were more important than ever in the era of social media, televised events, and never-ending surveys. Queen Camilla found no safety in those numbers. While Camilla steadfastly remained in the low 30s and frequently fell below, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had approval ratings that climbed beyond 70 and occasionally almost 80%. These were signals, not only data. In Britain, verdicts were given in living rooms rather than courtrooms. Despite all of its customs and crowns, the monarchy now depended on popular support to endure. The institution ran the risk of becoming irrelevant without it. There was no greater ruthless contrast between Catherine and Camilla. Every time Catherine appeared in public, it went viral. At a children's charity, a picture of her squatting to talk to toddlers won hearts all around the world. Networks showed a video of her holding a distraught mother, which was presented as evidence of her warmth and relatability. People saw Diana's legacy revived in those pictures, a recognizable elegance that gave them confidence that the crown's future was safe. Camilla's appearances, however, frequently sent a different message. She was photographed standing awkwardly at public occasions, lifting a glass at formal lunches, and seeming stiff and unsmiling. The visuals were brutal. One woman looked lively and organic, the other aloof and restrained. The gulf was evident side by side. Additionally, Camilla's position appeared to be more of a liability than a victory with each poll that increased the distance. With every month that went by, the tension inside the palace increased. Charles was subtly alerted by advisors that the public's tolerance was ebbing. Ever loyal to duty, Princess Anne expressed her worries directly. Additionally, Prince William, who was already leery of Camilla's increasing power, started to wonder how long the monarchy could withstand such disparaging remarks. What future did Camilla have, if the people had already selected their queen in spirit, and it wasn't the woman who was crowned next to Charles? The battleground for a monarchy, founded on formality, was now perception. Grand processions and glittering gems were no longer enough to protect the royal family from the statistical verdict. It became brutally evident in a 2024 survey. Catherine was chosen by 58% of the public as the person who best embodied the future of the monarchy. Camilla was only selected by 12%. These kinds of numbers weren't just whims, these were seismic changes that shaped future generations. When the court of public opinion had already rendered its decision, could tradition stand on its own? Given that the majority of the country had already moved on to someone else, could Camilla really represent the throne? They no longer muttered these questions in corners. They reverberated inside royal walls as well as in headlines and commentary. The crown no longer felt safe on Camilla's head. It was as brittle as glass, and the balance shifted even further with each new poll and photo comparison. So was the monarchy adjusting to a new era, or was it about to collapse under the strain of population? Keep an eye out, since crowns can be overthrown by number. Whispers on the walls of the palace. Life may seem planned, calm, and even eternal inside the glittering gates of Buckingham Palace and the reverberating corridors of Windsor. However, people closest to the Queen Consort started to pick up on little things that weren't part of the royal script. They initially appeared to be innocuous oddities. Camilla asking probing questions about policy, arranging meticulously planned dinners at Raymill, or requesting briefings that are typically only given to the sovereign. However, when combined, these pieces depicted a consort taking on a position she was never intended to play. Employees who had worked for royals for generations murmured about hazy borders, notes from meetings Charles had attended alone, briefings on confidential government deliberations, descriptions of parliamentary debates, and Camilla's strange requests were all recalled by aides. One person wrote it off as curiosity, while another gave a different explanation. "She is more curious than a consort ought to be." Later, the remark, which was dismissed at the time, became prescient. Her impact went beyond briefing notes and paper. At Raymill, visitors weren't necessarily relatives or friends. There were rumors of private meetings with cultural leaders, powerful benefactors, and politicians. They may have seemed to the general public as convivial gatherings, but to those behind the palace gates, they smelled like discreet lobbying. Was Camilla merely establishing connections, or was she creating a network of power that ran parallel to the king's? There was more to the rumors. Loyalty changed around her, as palace insiders saw. Previously committed only to Charles, courtiers started spending more time fulfilling Camilla's demands. Subtle loyalty tests were described by the staff, who quickly sent her messages, who discreetly passed information, who was hesitant. Aides described apprehensive looks in the corridors. When her name came up, the conversation sank to whispers. Some saw it as the regular palace life, but with extra layers of secrecy and procedure. Others perceived it as growing fault lines beneath the crown. The familial dynamic made everything more difficult. With a strong sense of duty, Princess Anne expressed her discomfort. William became more distant in his interactions with Camilla. He was calm in public, but cautious in private. Camilla's perceived overreach was complicated by the lingering memory of Diana, a sensitive and unvarnished issue. Even Catherine's quiet demeanor and increasing prominence in the public eye made Camilla's mistakes feel more serious, and every rumor more perilous. What started off as sporadic staff whispers started to crystallize into something more difficult to ignore. Usual meetings were noted in memos that surreptitiously circulated. Advisors maintained records on their observations and remarks. In isolation, none of it was scandalous, but taken as a whole, it seemed like a dossier being constructed in real time, one that had the potential to destroy the monarchy's entire facade of harmony. Were these stories just palace intrigue that will eventually die out like so many others before them? Or were they the first rifts in a foundation that was already being undermined by public skepticism? Insiders questioned how long it would be until rumors turned into allegations, as the distinction between loyalty and treachery got increasingly blurred. From here, it only gets more intense. Nobody anticipated the conflict. Tensions simmered beneath the surface of royal life for weeks. People continued to appear in public as if nothing had changed. William maintained a calm but detached demeanor. Catherine dazzled onlookers with her kindness, while Camilla grinned rigidly next to Charles. However, the atmosphere had become tense and electrifying behind closed doors. Once restricted to staff hallways, whispers had now reached the royals themselves, making them face the question that no one dared to ask out loud. Was Camilla going beyond what a consort ought to never do? Princess Anne was the first. For decades, she had endured the storms of gossip, known for her candor and commitment to duty. However, Camilla's increasing desire for power and the disclosure of secret meetings at Raymill were too much for her to keep quiet about. She made her warning without hesitation in a private meeting with Charles. She allegedly told him that he did not possess the crown. "She is causing harm to something that belongs to the people." Calm but scathing, her words struck like iron. The message was nearly intolerable to Charles, who had dedicated his life to protecting Camilla. But Anne wasn't by herself. Despite his more circumspect speech, William let his deeds speak louder than his words. During family get-togethers, his posture became more aloof. His conversations with Camilla were terse and aloof. His annoyance erupted behind the scenes when he heard that she was pushing for her kids to play bigger roles. This aim was not innocuous to him. He could never accept the rewriting of history, which was an affront to Diana's memory. Insiders claimed that his rage was evident when he faced Charles. He saw Camilla as a competitor force that threatened to reshape the monarchy to fit her own vision, not just as a stepmother. Delaying the confrontation was no longer an option. A meeting was set up in a private, oak-paneled room deep within Buckingham Palace. It was a purposeful setting. This was a family-only reckoning rather than a show for the cameras. Anne and William sat on each side of Charles, who sat at the head, clearly torn, representing both past and the future in equal measure. Camilla walked in with the same poise that had seen her through decades of mockery, a high chin and a steady look. This time, however, there was no audience to applaud her fortitude, and no pitying look from her spouse to protect her. Even though they weren't official, the accusations were straightforward and delivered with the composed authority of a woman who had dedicated her life to the Queen. William, first silent but with an unflinching gaze, added the weight of the following generation's judgment. Charles then responded, his voice shaking with sadness rather than rage. He detailed the complaints, personal affairs, intrusion into the government, hints of ambition outside of her position, and most importantly, the Raymill revelation that had called into question her devotion. Camilla lost her temper. Witnesses later described how her palm gripped the edge of the table as her lips compressed. "You can't mean this," she muttered, her tone a mixture of desperation and incredulity. She had endured scandal, tabloids, and public humiliation for decades while holding on to the belief that Charles would always be devoted to her. It was impossible to fathom him faltering now, in front of his sister and son. Charles nevertheless persisted. Despite his trembling, his statements were uncompromising. He reminded her that trust was the only thing that kept the monarchy afloat, and that trust had been betrayed. Camilla must have felt betrayed by the guy who had supported her in the face of adversity. The others in the room saw it as the reclaiming of the monarchy's borders. The altercation ended in silence rather than yelling. There was a hush that seemed to reverberate more loudly than any charge. In her eyes, Camilla's once unshakable crown hung by a thread in that silence. However, what transpired in that room would not only determine her destiny, but also permanently change the course of the kingdom. Everything would change with what came next, a silent verdict. The meeting space was not the council room where formal decisions were made, or the opulent ballroom where kings had celebrated victories. Rather, a smaller, oak-paneled hall that was chosen for its seclusion was nestled away from the echoes of history, deep within Buckingham Palace. Portraits of former monarchs lined the walls, their painted eyes gazing on as if they had witnessed a moment that would shape the future of the monarchy. With her typical resolve, chin up, shoulders squared, and a composed demeanor developed over decades of withstanding mockery, Camilla walked into the room. That poise had served as her defense against rumors and tabloids for years. Today, however, there were no cameras to influence, and no people to persuade. The only people who sat in front of her were family, and their gaze remained hard. Charles was clearly tired when he sat at the head of the table. As he shuffled papers he hardly needed, documents detailing private dinners, calls with political figures, and whispers that had solidified into evidence, his hands shook a little. The artifact that represented a crown she may never have earned, and her fixation on Raymill as a rival seat of influence. They had weathered storms together because of his love for Camilla, but now that relationship was put to the test under the weight of royalty. It was Anne who spoke first. Her voice was clipped and quiet, yet it was sharp enough to cut through the tension. "The people are the reason the monarchy exists," she stated firmly. "Ambition cannot be served by it." There was no harshness in the words, yet with the authority of a woman who had dedicated her life to fulfilling her responsibilities. William said nothing, his face more damning than his words. His mother's legacy was borne by his icy, unwavering gaze. That stillness must have sounded louder than any allegation to Camilla. Finally, Charles started. At first, his voice trembled, like a man who had been split in two. He talked about devotion, and how she had put up with mockery, how, in the court of public opinion, she had supported him during his exile. He acknowledged that he had survived decades of being overshadowed by Diana's memories because of her tenacity. His tone sharpened, yet for a brief moment it looked as if his words may become a defense, another act of commitment. He enumerated the complaints, her increasing power, and her meddling in affairs that belong only to the sovereign, her efforts to secure her children's status in royal circles, and lastly, the revelation at Raymil, a symbol too poisonous to ignore. "The crown is not mine to give," he said, raising his eyes to finally meet hers. "It is not for you to mold. The people own it, and their confidence has been betrayed." The aides stationed along the walls gasped as the words struck like a thunderclap. Hearing the verdict announced out loud appeared to shock even those who had anticipated it. Camilla lost her temper. Later, witnesses remembered her hand grasping the table so firmly that her knuckles became white and her lips quivering. Her voice broke as she murmured, after everything I've contributed." Charles, however, refused to give in. His eyes gleamed with tears, yet his will was unwavering. That day, he added, the title of Queen Consort would be terminated. Silence fell after decades of devotion and collective defiance against the outside world. Anne used just 2 words to break the silence. "The time has come." They bore the burden of centuries of custom, of all the kings who had put duty ahead of their own interests. William remained silent, but it was sufficient. His unblinking, icy gaze gave the impression that Diana herself was speaking via her son's face. It was the last straw for Camilla. Her eyes were wide with amazement, and her face was pallid as she staggered back. The idea that the man who had defended her against a whole country would now deprive her of the same crown she had battled for was the thing she had feared the most and believed was unthinkable. There was a profound silence in the chamber, the silence that comes after thunder. The decision had been made. Duty had triumphed over love, or maybe the crown had sacrificed one of its own, as some would later claim. The country responds. Charles had hardly finished speaking when the quiet inside Buckingham Palace started to break. Aides scrawled notes, courtiers muttered in concern, and soon the inevitable happened. Those oak-paneled walls did not hear the decision. What started out as a private reckoning turned into a public controversy. The nation's streets were filled with sorrow, rage, and incredulity as the news spread across headlines. Queen Consort was no longer there. Crowds rapidly gathered outside the royal gates, as if history itself need witnesses. Some carried candles, their flames flickering in the twilight, like a memorial to a deceased person. Pictures of Diana were lifted into the air, her memory evoked once more as if she had risen from the dead. Others held signs supporting Camilla, charging the monarchy of treachery and compromising allegiance for survival. It was a somber and aggressive environment, a battleground, and a vigil in equal measure. The reaction was just as fierce on social media. Within minutes, hashtags like Queen No More and Justice for Diana became popular. Captions that now resembled epitaphs were uploaded with photos of Camilla standing next to Charles at her crowning. Messages of sadness and compassion for a woman who had suffered decades of mockery just to be abandoned when she thought she was at last safe were intertwined with derision. Though, for Queen Camilla, the news was devastating in every way. Her victory had been turned into sorrow in front of millions of people. However, was the monarchy revealing its weakness or defending itself? That was the question that kept coming up in newspaper columns, discussion shows, and chats in coffee shops. Charles' action was viewed as decisive by some, evidence that the monarchy was capable of self-correction and upholding the institution above egos. He was portrayed by others as weak, a monarch who had betrayed the same woman who had supported him through scandal and disdain. It was a disturbing sight to monarchists. What assurance did any royal title provide if a queen consort might be removed so quickly? Was loyalty in the crown conditional, to disappear as soon as the numbers went south? But for Republicans, it was evidence of the instability of the monarchy, a family story that permeates national life and reveals the institution's reliance on appearance rather than content. William and Catherine, meantime, were inadvertently declared the silent winners. Their popularity served as a buffer against the turbulence, as their presence soothed the throng. Days after the announcement, videos of Catherine visiting a children's hospice went viral. Her calmness and friendliness stood in stark contrast to Camilla's loneliness. According to polls conducted that same week, Camilla's approval fell into the single digits, while Catherine's rose to all-time highs. For Camilla, losing her title and being removed from official portraits and stationery was the ultimate heartbreak. Once a queen, she was now discarded, and a lone figure in the public consciousness. She was viewed by her supporters as a betrayed woman. She was now paying the price for decades of controversy, according to her detractors. However, the fact was the same in both versions. The country was split, and the backlash exposed the weakness of the monarchy, in addition to Camilla's downfall. But at what price had the crown survived? You will want to know the extent of this storm spread. Camilla's last stroll. The decision had been made. The crown was silently removed. Buckingham Palace acted quickly to end her rule in the days that followed. Her code disappeared from official records. Gilded walls were silently cleared of portraits that had just been hung, as if history itself had been altered overnight. Even the royal website was changed. The woman who had formerly inhabited the very heart of the monarchy was now pushed to the periphery, and was only a shadow in the corridor. The most eerie moment, however, was captured in a photograph seen by those gathered outside Clarence House, rather than in the media or on television. Many would consider Camilla's walk to be her last. There was no formal vehicle, no entourage, and no crown. Clad in subdued hues, her face impassive, she strolled leisurely along the gravel pathway of the house that she and Charles had lived. The huge doors behind her shut with the solemn finality of dismissal, rather than with fanfare. Silence descended on the street's crowds. While some watched with cold delight, others with sympathy. It was the first time a woman who had struggled for decades to win the prize had been denied it. It was a heartbreaking sight for her supporters. Sad news for Queen Camilla, who sacrificed so much to support Charles, only to be left behind when duty called for it. The moment felt like justice to her critics. Finally, Diana's ghost settles scores in the most conspicuous manner. It was difficult to overlook the symbolism of that lonesome stroll, after being crowned as consort, and subsequently ridiculed as an intruder. Camilla now walked as a woman undone, rather than as a queen. Nevertheless, her story was not yet complete, according to those who knew her the best. Yes, she was heartbroken, but she was also silently determined. Was she getting ready to withdraw within herself, quietly coping with her loss, or was she already thinking of taking a different route, one of covert retaliation, driven by letters and secrets that only she could divulge? Her fall had spared the kingdom, but it had exposed its weakness. What else could break under strain, if a queen consort could be eliminated so quickly? Camilla's final walk left more questions than answers, leaving the public divided between suspicion and sympathy. It was unclear whether Camilla's retreat signaled the end of the palace's lengthy history of scandal, or the start of a new one. Was her reign really coming to an end, the final page of a tale characterized by heartache and controversy?
Or was this a prelude to a storm she was the only one with the ability to release? Although Camilla's crown has vanished into the past, her legacy endures. Was this her last chapter of heartbreak, or the greatest injury to the monarchy? Remember to subscribe for more royal revelations, and leave your comments below.